I don't know if that's a good sermon, a scripture to read right before you preach, but by the way, in 2 weeks, Cheryl Cole is going to come and preach for us. She's the city councilwoman. She lives right over here in Wilshirewood. And we're going to have a choir from an African-American church. We'll sing, so this place will rock. And we're going to have a great, great time celebrating Black History Month. And David Southmaid has been pushing us for a couple of years to do that, and we're going to do it, and we're going to have a grand time doing it as well. Today I want to preach to you with the title, Running on Empty. Last Sunday, several of you commented that I looked haggard and worn out. The ones who are laughing, you know, are the ones who made that remark. Anyway, I began to feel sorry for myself. You know, you ever get involved in self-pity? You know, I need to take a nap, a little time off, treat myself better. You know how that goes. And then, you know, that other self comes in and begins to say to you, you got things to do in the future. You better get busy. And it clicked. I was driving my Prius back and forth to the airport and around town and talking to people and one thing and another, and I didn't notice that it was running out of gas. Now, a Prius has little dots on it. It has one of those digital dials. It doesn't have the thing that goes back and forth like this. And as the dots disappear, you know that you're running out. I hadn't noticed. And it was on the last dot, and the last dot was beginning to blink. And then, not only that, they built into this thing, not only the blink, but then a sound comes on and begins to go ping, you know, which means you're almost out of gas. And I was coming back from the airport, and you know that stretch of road on 183 where there are no filling stations, no buildings, you know, I'm sure they'll fill it up in another 6 months, but right now it's empty. And it struck me that if I run out of gas here, I got a long walk. And you know, the next thing that happened was that my mind turned to the future. There's appointments I've got to make. There are other things I'd have to rearrange. If I have to stop for gas and fill up, that's still going to take a little time. And I began to think about how I had to rearrange the rest of my day. Isn't that interesting? How your mind works. And I also recall a time when Wanda and I were working in Asia, and I had to come back to Chicago for a meeting, and I knew I had to do a turnaround and get back to Asia for another meeting. And when we did the arrangements for the flight, we always made sure we took the hub of Tokyo and not Seoul, because Seoul, Korea in those days, had a lot of emergencies, and they just shut everything down. But they changed my flight coming back, and it wasn't going to go through Tokyo, it was going through Seoul. So I had my fingers crossed, and when we got there, we started flying around in circles. And then finally, after a while, the pilot announced, we're running out of fuel and we'll have to make a landing elsewhere. So, you know, immediately you think of all those connecting flights and where they're going to be. But where are you going to land? I mean, Tokyo is a little ways away, and it's over water. And then they announced that we were landing at a secret airbase, and that we had to pull all the window shades down, and we couldn't look out while we were there. And, you know, goodness, gonna have more time on the ground. And as soon as we landed, the soldiers came on, and they marched up and down the aisle to make sure that nobody peeked. And it was real interesting because one of the young soldiers walked by me, and one of the older Korean ladies leapt up and hugged him. And what little Korean I knew, it was her grandson. and it kind of embarrassed him, and all the other soldiers laughed at him, but you know, they kept us on track. And then they all left the plane, and we got ready to take off, and of course we all peeked. But we made it back, and the interesting thing is that in this emergency, my mind was going, how do I rearrange? We didn't have cell phones in those days, or you'd have to go in the airport and find a phone, you know, to make a call, even long distance. How was I going to explain this and set up and miss this meeting and hit this meeting? My mind had already gone to the future. And when you're running on empty and you're kind of out of gas, isn't it interesting that you immediately begin to shift to thinking about the future and what you got to do to get through it? I was watching TV this week, and they had a very interesting one on the Navy SEALs. You may have seen it, but they were showing that these were really, you know, 100+ type soldiers, and that they put them through all kinds of tests before you could even go to basic training, and called out many people. And then when you got to basic training, they would take them and they would run them with these heavy logs until they knew that their strength was gone. And then they would take those people and make them do obstacle courses and all of these kinds of things and see who fell off, who couldn't make it. And they said only about 40% of the people that get to basic training ever make it to SEALs, because they ran them out of gas. And then they saw who could perform, who could really do it. And right after that, they had a little show on Haiti. And they had Dr. Gupta, which you probably all know. And the little story was about, he had come there and been operating for a day and a half or something, and he'd gone into this unit, and the country that the doctors were from ordered them all out, and he had to stay there all night, watching after these patients who were critical. And he was tired and worn out of gas. But he performed. And then you begin to think, you know, the scripture that was read, I can imagine that if Jesus wasn't out of gas, he was out of gas by the time he got through it. And if you read the scriptures very closely, the New Testament in particular, they were always out of gas. They were running for their lives. They knew they weren't going to make it. They had to find ways to communicate this word in very hostile environments. Read the stories of Paul, of how he had to escape in the middle of the night and had to run on and to meet up with people. They were all running out of gas. They were living on empty. And you know, I think of my parents. During the Depression, it wasn't an easy time. They didn't always have work. Sometimes they were looking for work. My mother would work 2 jobs, sometimes 3. My dad, when he wasn't working, he was looking for work. And you know, they'd come home at night, and we'd have supper, and we'd sing and songs, and we would do all kinds of things. You wouldn't have known it. You wouldn't have known it.